The Ravenwood Asylum stood as a grim monument to the past, its crumbling facade and overgrown grounds a testament to years of neglect and decay. Once a place of supposed healing, it had long since fallen into ruin, becoming a magnet for ghost stories and urban legends. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the screams that echoed through its halls at night and the shadows that moved within its broken windows. It was said that the spirits of the tormented patients still roamed the asylum, seeking vengeance on those who dared to intrude. Mark, a seasoned paranormal investigator, had heard these stories countless times. His YouTube channel, dedicated to exploring haunted locations, had brought him to many such places. But something about Ravenwood called to him. The reports of unusual activity had spiked recently, with several people claiming to have seen ghostly figures and heard blood-curdling cries. Determined to uncover the truth, Mark decided to spend a night in the asylum, armed with his camera, recording equipment, and a steely resolve. The sun was setting as Mark approached the asylum, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape. The air grew colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over him. He paused at the rusted gates, taking in the sight of the imposing structure before him. The windows, broken and shattered, seemed to stare back at him like hollow eyes, and the whispers of the past seemed to linger in the air. Mark took a deep breath, steeling himself for the night ahead. He had faced many haunted places before, but something about Ravenwood felt different, more sinister. With his gear in hand, he pushed open the creaking gates and stepped into the grounds of the asylum, ready to confront whatever horrors awaited him inside. Mark's footsteps echoed against the cracked pavement as he walked towards the entrance of Ravenwood Asylum. The building loomed over him, its once grand architecture now a shadow of its former self. Ivy crawled up the walls, and the roof sagged under the weight of years of neglect. The air was thick with the scent of dampness and decay, and an eerie silence hung heavy in the air. As he approached the main doors, Mark reviewed the details of the tip he had received. An anonymous email had detailed recent sightings of ghostly apparitions, disembodied voices, and sudden drops in temperature. The sender claimed to have witnessed these phenomena firsthand and urged Mark to investigate. Despite his seasoned experience, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that this visit would be different from his previous investigations. He pushed open the heavy wooden doors, their hinges protesting with a loud creak. Inside, the air was musty, and dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight. The reception area was in shambles, with broken furniture and scattered papers littering the floor. The walls were adorned with faded, peeling wallpaper, and the remnants of old paintings hung crookedly. Mark set up his base camp in the reception area, arranging his equipment methodically. He placed motion sensors at strategic points, set up infrared cameras, and calibrated his EMF electromagnetic field detector. His goal was to document any supernatural events and gather evidence to either confirm or debunk the asylum's haunted reputation. As he moved deeper into the asylum, Mark couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water or the distant sound of rats scurrying. He passed through the hallways, shining his flashlight into dark corners and open doorways. Each room told a story of its own: rusted bed frames, decaying mattresses, and personal items left behind by the patients who once lived there. In one of the rooms, Mark found a stack of old patient records. He carefully picked them up, noting the dates and the conditions described within. The details were disturbing, recounting stories of abuse, neglect, and experimental treatments that bordered on torture. The more he read, the more he understood why the asylum had such a dark reputation. Mark felt a chill run down his spine as he continued his exploration. He had just scratched the surface of Ravenwood's secrets, and the night was only beginning. With his camera rolling and his senses on high alert, he prepared himself for whatever might come next. The asylum held many horrors, and Mark was determined to uncover them all. Mark's exploration of Ravenwood Asylum continued as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the decaying building into darkness. The interior of the asylum was a labyrinth of narrow hallways and cluttered rooms, each more foreboding than the last. Mark's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing glimpses of the asylum's grim history. In one of the larger rooms, Mark discovered what appeared to be the remnants of a common area. Broken chairs and tables were scattered about, and the walls were covered in faded murals that once might have been cheerful. Now they seemed grotesque, the colors distorted by time and neglect. The sense of unease grew stronger, and Mark could almost hear the echoes of the past. The laughter of patients turned into screams of terror. He decided to set up his first night vision camera in the common area, aiming it towards the darkest corner of the room. The EMF detector placed nearby showed no immediate signs of activity, but Mark knew better than to rely solely on initial readings. He spoke into his camera, providing commentary for his viewers. "This is Mark, documenting the first hour of my investigation at Ravenwood Asylum. The atmosphere here is incredibly tense, and I can almost feel the weight of the building's history pressing down on me. So far, no signs of paranormal activity, but it's still early. Stay tuned." Continuing his exploration, Mark moved to the upper floors. The stairway was narrow and steep, the wood creaking ominously under his weight. The upper levels of the asylum were even more dilapidated, with parts of the ceiling caved in and debris littering the floors. As he reached the top, a sudden chill enveloped him, and he saw his breath misting in the air. Mark's flashlight flickered, and he tapped it against his palm, trying to steady the beam. He entered one of the rooms, which appeared to be a patient's cell. The bed was still intact, but the mattress was stained and torn. On the walls, crudely scratched words and symbols spoke of despair and madness. Mark ran his fingers over the etchings, feeling a connection to the tormented souls who had once occupied the space. In the corner of the room, he found a small, leather-bound journal. The pages were brittle, but the writing was still legible. It belonged to a patient named Lydia, and her entries painted a harrowing picture of life inside Ravenwood. She wrote about the treatments she endured, the cruelty of the staff, and the fear that consumed her daily. Mark felt a pang of sorrow as he read her final entry, which spoke of a darkness that watched over her, waiting to claim her soul. With Lydia's journal in hand, Mark continued his investigation, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The night was far from over, and the asylum held many more secrets waiting to be uncovered. As the night deepened, the atmosphere within Ravenwood Asylum grew more oppressive. The silence was punctuated by the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant rustle of unseen creatures. Mark moved cautiously through the corridors, his senses on high alert. The chill that had settled over him upstairs seemed to follow, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He decided to explore the lower levels, where the most disturbing rumors were centered. The basement of the asylum was said to be the site of unspeakable horrors, where the most severe patients were confined and subjected to experimental treatments. The stairs leading down were narrow and steep, and the air grew colder with each step Mark took. At the bottom, he found himself in a long, dimly lit hallway. The walls were lined with doors, each one leading to a small, windowless cell. Mark set up another camera at the entrance, ensuring that he captured anything that might happen. As he moved deeper into the basement, he felt a growing sense of dread, as if the very walls were closing in on him. The first cell he entered was empty, save for a rusted bed frame and a few scattered papers. Mark shone his flashlight around, noting the deep scratches on the walls and floor. He spoke into his camera, describing the eerie atmosphere and the sense of isolation that permeated the space. Suddenly, a soft whisper echoed through the hallway, sending a jolt of fear through Mark. He swung his flashlight towards the source of the sound, but saw nothing. The whisper came again, louder this time, and Mark realized it was coming from the next cell. Steeling himself, he approached the door and pushed it open. Inside, the air was frigid, and a pale, ghostly figure stood in the corner facing the wall. The figure was that of a young woman, her hair hanging in matted tangles over her face. She wore a tattered hospital gown, and her skin was so pale it seemed almost translucent. Mark's heart raced as he realized he was seeing a spirit, his first real encounter to Ravenwood. "Who are you?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. The ghostly figure turned slowly, revealing hollow, sunken eyes and a face etched with sorrow. "Leave this place," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's not safe. He's coming." Mark's mind raced. Who's coming? What happened here? The spirit's expression turned to one of terror, and she began to fade, her form dissolving into the darkness. "You must leave," she repeated, her voice echoing through the cell. "He won't let you go." Before Mark could ask anything else, the spirit vanished completely, leaving him alone in the freezing cell. The air grew still, and the oppressive silence returned. Mark's hands shook as he packed up his equipment and hurried back to the main hallway. He knew he couldn't leave just yet. There were still so many questions left unanswered, and the presence of the spirit only confirmed that something truly sinister was at work within the asylum. Determined to uncover the truth, Mark continued his investigation, even as the shadows seemed to grow darker and the whispers more insistent. He knew he was not alone, and whatever lurked in the darkness was far from finished with him. Mark's encounter with the spirit in the basement left him shaken, but it also fueled his determination to uncover the asylum's dark secrets. He returned to the reception area to review the footage he had captured. The night vision cameras had recorded several instances of orbs and unexplained movements, but the most chilling evidence was the apparition he had witnessed firsthand. With his mind racing, Mark decided to explore the records room in search of more information about the asylum's history. The room was cluttered with old files, patient records, and medical equipment covered in dust. As he sifted through the documents, he found a hidden drawer behind a filing cabinet. Inside were records that detailed the asylum's most notorious patients and the treatments they had undergone. One file in particular caught his eye. It belonged to Dr. Victor Harlan, the head doctor at Ravenwood during its final years of operation. The records painted a horrifying picture of a man obsessed with experimenting on his patients, often under the guise of medical treatment. Electroshock therapy, lobotomies, and isolation were just a few of the cruel methods he employed. The more Mark read, the more he realized that Dr. Harlan's methods had driven many patients to insanity or death. Among the records, Mark found a faded photograph of Dr. Harlan. The doctor's eyes were cold and calculating, a stark contrast to the suffering he had inflicted. As Mark stared at the photograph, he felt a sudden, intense chill, as if the spirit of Dr. Harlan was watching him. Shaking off the unease, he continued to search for clues. In the back of the records room, Mark discovered a hidden door. It was old and partially concealed by shelves, but the lock was broken, allowing him to push it open. Behind the door was a narrow staircase leading down to a series of hidden rooms. The air grew colder as he descended, and the oppressive feeling of dread returned. The first room he entered was small and contained a single metal chair with restraints. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars filled with preserved organs and other grotesque specimens. Mark's stomach churned at the sight, but he pressed on, knowing he was getting closer to the truth. In the next room, he found a series of journals belonging to Dr. Harlan. The entries detailed the doctor's descent into madness, his obsession with discovering the secrets of the human mind, and his belief that he could cure insanity through extreme measures. The final entries spoke of a dark presence that had taken over the asylum, influencing his actions and driving him to commit even greater atrocities. Mark realized that the dark presence Dr. Harlan had written about was likely the same malevolent force that now haunted the asylum. As he read the last entry, he heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. The air grew colder, and a sense of impending doom washed over him. Gathering the journals and his equipment, Mark knew he had to confront this malevolent spirit. The asylum's dark past had to be brought to light, and the souls trapped within needed to be freed. With renewed determination, he made his way back to the main part of the asylum, ready to face whatever horrors awaited him. As Mark made his way back to the main part of the asylum, the air grew colder, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to intensify. The distant sound of footsteps followed him, echoing through the empty halls. He knew he was not alone. The malevolent spirit of Dr. Harlan was close. He returned to the common area where he had set up his base camp. The night vision cameras continued to record, capturing every flicker of movement and change in temperature. Mark reviewed the footage and noticed several instances where shadowy figures appeared briefly before vanishing. The orbs and strange lights were becoming more frequent, confirming the presence of supernatural activity. Determined to confront the spirit, Mark decided to use an old technique to try and communicate with it. He set up a spirit box, a device that rapidly scans radio frequencies, allowing spirits to communicate through the white noise. As the device crackled to life, Mark asked Dr. Harlan, "Are you here?" The static filled the room, punctuated by brief snippets of voices. At first, the responses were fragmented and unintelligible, but then a deep, chilling voice came through clearly. "Yes." Mark's heart pounded as he continued, "Why are you haunting this place? What do you want?" The spirit box crackled again, and the same voice responded, "Power control suffering." Mark shuddered at the words. "You tormented your patients. Why did you do it?" The voice was silent for a moment before replying, "They were weak, had to be cured." Suddenly, the room grew colder, and Mark felt a presence behind him. He turned slowly, and there stood the spirit of Dr. Harlan, his eyes burning with malevolence. The doctor's ghostly form flickered, his expression twisted with rage and insanity. "You shouldn't be here," Dr. Harlan's spirit hissed. "This is my domain." Mark stood his ground, his fear giving way to determination. "You have no power over me. I'm here to uncover the truth and free the souls he tormented." Dr. Harlan's spirit advanced, and Mark felt a wave of intense cold wash over him. His vision blurred, and he was suddenly overwhelmed by a series of horrific visions. He saw the patients of Ravenwood, their faces contorted in pain and terror as they endured Dr. Harlan's cruel experiments. He heard their screams and felt their anguish as if it were his own. The visions intensified, and Mark struggled to maintain his grip on reality. He could feel the malevolent spirit trying to break his mind, to drive him insane just as it had done to the patients. Summoning all his strength, Mark focused on the truth he had uncovered and the determination to free the trapped souls. "You can't break me," Mark shouted, his voice echoing through the common area. "Your reign of terror ends here." With those words, the spirit of Dr. Harlan let out a furious scream and lunged at Mark. The air crackled with energy as the two forces collided, the spirit trying to overpower Mark's will. But Mark's resolve held firm, and he reached into his bag, pulling out one of the journals he had found. He opened the journal and began to read aloud the final entry, the words of Dr. Harlan himself. As he read, the spirit recoiled, its form flickering and weakening. Mark continued, pouring all his energy into the words, and the spirit let out a final, agonized scream before dissolving into the air. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the room grew warmer. Mark knew that the battle was not yet over, but he had weakened the malevolent spirit. With renewed determination, he prepared to uncover the final piece of the puzzle and end the asylum's nightmare once and for all. Mark took a moment to catch his breath, the oppressive weight of the asylum's dark energy lifting slightly. The confrontation with Dr. Harlan's spirit had taken a toll on him, but he knew he couldn't. He stopped now. There were still more secrets to uncover and more souls to free. He decided to explore the upper floors once more, hoping to find the source of the asylum's power. The narrow stairway creaked under his weight, and the air grew colder as he ascended. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, and Mark's flashlight cast eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper. As he walked, Mark began to notice strange things. Objects moved out of the corner of his eye, and he heard faint whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. His mind played tricks on him, making it difficult to distinguish reality from illusion. The line between the physical and the supernatural blurred, and Mark felt his sanity slipping. He entered one of the rooms, his flashlight flickering. The walls were covered in disturbing drawings, crude depictions of patients in torment, surrounded by dark, twisted figures. Mark's heart raced as he realized that these drawings were not just the ramblings of a madman, but glimpses into the true nature of the asylum's malevolence. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him, and the room plunged into darkness. Mark's flashlight died, and he was left in pitch black, the oppressive silence broken only by the sound of his own breathing. Panic set in, and he fumbled with his equipment, trying to get the light back on. In the darkness, he felt a cold hand brush against his arm, and he heard the faint whisper of a voice. "You can't escape. You belong to us now." Mark's fear turned to determination. He had come too far to be driven mad by the spirits of Ravenwood. He took a deep breath, focusing on the mission at hand. He managed to get his flashlight working again, the beam revealing the empty room. The whispers and the touch were gone, but the sense of unease remained. He knew he had to find the source of the asylum's power and destroy it. With renewed resolve, Mark made his way to the top floor, where the head doctor's office was located. The air grew colder, and the sense of dread intensified. He could feel the malevolent spirit watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. As he entered the office, he saw the final piece of the puzzle, a cursed artifact on the desk. It was a small, ornate box, covered in strange symbols and emanating a dark energy. Mark knew that this was the source of the asylum's power, the object that had allowed Dr. Harlan to exert his control over the patients and the spirits. Mark steeled himself for the final confrontation. He had to destroy the artifact and end the asylum's reign of terror once and for all. With the spirits still whispering in his ear and the shadows closing in, he prepared for the ultimate battle against the malevolent force that had plagued Ravenwood for so long. Mark stood in the dimly lit office of Dr. Harlan, the cursed artifact before him radiating a palpable malevolence. The small, ornate box seemed to pulse with dark energy, the strange symbols etched into its surface glowing faintly. The air was thick with tension, and Mark knew that destroying this artifact was the only way to end the asylum's nightmare. As he reached for the box, the temperature in the room plummeted, and a cold wind whipped around him. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the spirits of the asylum were both warning and urging him on. Mark steeled himself, his hand trembling as he grasped the artifact. A sudden force threw him back against the wall, and the spirit of Dr. Harlan materialized in the center of the room, his eyes burning with fury. "You dare to challenge me," the spirit hissed, his voice echoing with unearthly power. "You are nothing but a trespasser in my domain." Mark struggled to his feet, his determination unwavering. "Your reign of terror ends here," he shouted, his voice filled with resolve. "I will free the souls you've tormented and put an end to this madness." Dr. Harlan's spirit let out a chilling laugh. "You are a fool. The darkness here is beyond your comprehension. You will join the others in eternal suffering." Summoning all his strength, Mark lunged for the artifact again. The spirit of Dr. Harlan tried to stop him, but Mark's resolve was stronger. He grabbed the box and smashed it against the floor, the impact shattering the artifact and releasing a blinding light. The room shook violently, and a deafening roar filled the air as the dark energy was released. The spirit of Dr. Harlan screamed in agony, his form flickering and disintegrating before Mark's eyes. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the temperature began to rise, the darkness receding. Mark collapsed to the floor, exhausted but triumphant. The whispers had ceased, and the spirits of the asylum were finally at peace. He knew that the nightmare was over, but the experience had left him deeply scarred. The horrors he had witnessed would haunt him for the rest of his life. As the building began to crumble around him, Mark summoned the last of his strength and made his way out of the asylum. The walls groaned and cracked, and debris rained down as he navigated the collapsing structure. He stumbled through the main doors, just as the entire building began to cave in. Outside, the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the ruins of Ravenwood Asylum. Mark looked back at the destroyed building, a sense of closure washing over him. The spirits were free, and the malevolent force that had plagued the asylum was gone. He took a deep breath, the fresh air filling his lungs and clearing his mind. Mark knew that he had done the right thing, even if it had come at a great personal cost. The experience had changed him, but he was determined to use his newfound knowledge to help others who might face similar horrors. As he walked away from the ruins of Ravenwood Asylum, Mark felt a sense of peace. The haunting was over, and he could finally move on. But the memories of that night would stay with him forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows and the strength it takes to confront it.